So today we're tackling a massive question in the whole climate fight. How do you put a reliable, trustworthy value on a forest that's just left standing? We're going to be digging into one potential answer, a super high-integrity rulebook called the REDD+ Environmental Excellence Standard, or as it's known, trees.
And yeah, this question right here, it's the absolute core of the problem. It's one thing to say you want to help the climate, right? It is a completely different ballgame to prove that the money you spent made a real, measurable difference. And that challenge, the whole challenge of proof, is what we're going to unpack today.
That very challenge has led to what's basically a crisis of trust in the world of carbon markets. So before we can really get into the rulebook itself, we first have to understand the problem that is desperately trying to solve.
And let me tell you, the demand for this stuff is huge. All around the world, big companies and governments are under serious pressure to meet their climate promises, their environmental, social, and governance goals, or ESG. And protecting forests, which are just these gigantic carbon-sucking sponges, is right at the top of the list.
Okay, so how do they actually do it? Well, they buy something called a carbon credit. The idea in theory is pretty simple. One credit is supposed to represent 1 ton of carbon dioxide that was either stopped from going into the atmosphere or was pulled out of it, all because a forest was protected.
And right here, this is the crisis of trust in a nutshell. How do you, as a buyer, know that the credit you just bought is legit? Did it represent a real drop in emissions? Is that forest going to stay standing forever? And this is the big one. Was the action truly new, or was that forest going to be just fine anyway? These are the questions that have been haunting the market for years.
Okay, so this is where our rulebook finally comes into the picture. To solve this whole crisis of trust, a completely new level of standardization was needed.
All right, first things first, let's get a key term down, REDD+. This is the big overarching idea. It's a global framework, and to put it simply, it's all about making a living forest more valuable than a dead one by creating a real financial reason to protect it.
So, with REDD+ is the big idea. You can think of ART as the architect. It's the organization that was literally built to turn that concept into a system you can actually trust. Their whole goal is to create such a rigorous process that when a credit gets issued, everybody trusts what it represents.
And ART's official rulebook? It's called Trees. This is the document, the high bar that we're focused on today. Just think of it as the incredibly detailed set of regulations that a country or a province has to follow to the letter if they want to issue these top-tier carbon credits.
So what's actually in this rulebook? What does it demand? How does it build that trust we keep talking about? Let's get into the nitty-gritty.
Right off the bat, a really key principle here is scale. See, Trees isn't for some small, one-off project in the middle of nowhere. It focuses on entire governments, whole nations, or really large provinces and states. And this is so important because it ensures we're looking at big, comprehensive climate action, not just tiny, isolated efforts.
And the process for actually getting these credits is, well, it's incredibly tough. A government can't just ask for them. First, they submit their entire plan. Then, a completely independent third-party auditor comes in to check if the plan even meets the trees rules. After some time passes, that same auditor comes back to verify the actual on-the-ground results. Only then, after all that, does ART issue the credits on a public registry for the whole world to see.
And this brings us to one of the most critical rules in the entire standard. Seriously, this one is a game changer for tackling that trust problem.
So here's the bottom line. You don't get credit for a promise. It's that simple. Under Trees, you only get credits for results that have already happened and have been checked and confirmed by an independent party. This is fundamental. It ensures that every single credit represents a real historical achievement, not just a hopeful plan.
Okay, so even with a great system on paper, we all know the real world is messy, right? A good rulebook has to be ready for all the tricky problems, what I like to call the gotchas, that can trip the whole thing up.
First up is additionality. It sounds a little jargony, but it's really just the classic skeptic's question. Hey, would you have protected that forest even if I didn't pay you? Trees tackles this by setting a strict historical baseline for deforestation. You only earn credits for reducing deforestation below what was already happening, which proves the action was truly new or additional.
The next gotcha is the reversal problem. Imagine this. You protect a forest, you get your credits for all the carbon it's storing, and then a massive wildfire roars through, releasing all that carbon right back into the atmosphere. So what now? Your climate benefit has literally just gone up in smoke.
The solution is actually a really clever form of insurance. It's called the buffer pool. For every ton of carbon reduction a country achieves, it doesn't get a full credit.
Nope, a percentage, and that percentage is based on its specific risk of things like fires or political instability is automatically held back in this big shared insurance pool. So if a disaster does happen, credits from that buffer are canceled to cover the loss, which keeps the whole system intact and credible.
And finally, there's leakage. This is kind of like squeezing a balloon, you know? You successfully protect Forest A, which is great. But the loggers, they don't just vanish. They just move over to Forest B, and the deforestation just pops up somewhere else. You haven't actually solved the neck problem.
The tree's rulebook anticipates this. Because it operates at that huge national scale, it's designed to see this shift when it happens. The standard forces a mandatory deduction from the credits earned to account for any deforestation that was just displaced, not actually stopped.
Okay, so after all of these rules and audits and deductions and verification steps, let's take a step back. What's the big picture? Why does having a rulebook this incredibly strict actually matter so much?
It all comes back to that one word we started with, trust. A buyer, whether it's a giant corporation or a whole country, has to know with confidence that the credit they are buying is the real deal. By setting such a high bar for quality, standards like trees can finally make protecting forests a genuinely attractive, credible, and most importantly, a scalable investment.
And that is the ultimate goal. You can see it right there in RT's own mission statement. The point of all this painstaking accounting isn't just about having perfect books. It's about unlocking the billions of dollars in long-term finance that are desperately needed to actually protect and restore the world's forests at a scale that can really move the needle on climate change.
Which, of course, leaves us with a pretty fascinating and, honestly, a huge question. For decades, saving forests has kind of relied on goodwill and charity. But what if? What if a really strict, really trusted set of rules could finally make saving the world's forests a profitable business? Can we make saving the planet a globally profitable venture? The answer to that, well, it could change everything.